In October 1952, a blinding flash tore across the remote waters of Western Australia, instantly vaporizing a Royal Navy frigate. In that single microsecond, Great Britain did something many thought impossible. They forced their way back into the global superpower conversation. This is the story of Operation Hurricane, a tale of brilliant engineering born out of absolute political isolation. It's a narrative of how British scientists, locked out by their closest ally, built an atomic weapon from scratch to secure Britain's seat as the world's third nuclear power. Today, we will look at the frantic race against time, the innovative physics used to overcome a severe resource shortage, and how a 25 kiloton blast reshaped global defense strategy forever. To understand Operation Hurricane, we have to look back to 1946. During World War II, British scientists worked hand in hand with the Americans on the Manhattan Project. But the passage of the US McMahon Act abruptly terminated all wartime nuclear cooperation. Overnight, Britain was locked out of the very atomic secrets it had helped discover. Prime Minister Clement Attlee knew Britain couldn't rely on anyone else. In January 1947, facing an increasingly aggressive Soviet Union and fearing US isolationism, he authorized a completely independent, highly clandestine British atomic bomb program. To lead this effort, they chose William Penney. Penney was a brilliant choice. He was a Manhattan Project veteran who had actually flown on the observation plane during the Nagasaki bombing to document the blast. He set up shop under the cover name High Explosive Research, working out of Fort Halstead and later Aldermaston. When we think of nuclear delivery, we usually think of heavy bombers or ballistic missiles, but as an island nation dependent on maritime trade, Britain's chiefs of staff worried about an entirely different, asymmetrical nightmare. They feared the Soviet Union wouldn't bother trying to penetrate Britain's radar networks or air defenses. Instead, they could simply sneak an atomic bomb into the cargo hold of a civilian merchant vessel and detonate it in a major port like London or Liverpool. This fear directly dictated how Britain tested its first weapon. Rather than placing it on a tower or dropping it from a plane, they decided to detonate it inside the hull of a 1,450-ton river-class frigate, the HMS Plym. They wanted to gather empirical data on what exactly happens when an atomic blast meets a steel hull, how the shockwave propagates through water, and the realities of underwater cavitation. Lacking the vast industrial architecture of the United States, British engineers had to optimize every single step of the nuclear fuel cycle. They had to carefully manage the irradiation of elements, fine-tune short burn-up cycles for reactor cores, and master submerged cooling methods. The real bottleneck was chemical separation, extracting minuscule amounts of pure weapons-grade plutonium from highly irradiated material. Because fissile material was incredibly scarce in post-war Britain, the scientists couldn't afford to be wasteful. This extreme scarcity forced them to rethink the internal physics of the bomb itself, leading to an engineering breakthrough. The American Fat Man bomb used a solid core where the heavy uranium temper rested directly against the plutonium, but British scientists calculated that they could get way more performance if they introduced a literal gap. Look at this design. On the outside is the temper, a heavy natural uranium-238 shell designed to reflect escaping neutrons back into the weapon. But notice the space beneath it, the vacuum air gap. Suspended right in the center is the levitated core, a solid sphere of metallic plutonium-239 alloyed with gallium. When the conventional explosives detonate, the shockwave slams into the heavy uranium temper, accelerating it across that empty vacuum gap. It builds up massive hydrodynamic momentum before it strikes the plutonium core. Think of it like a hammer striking a nail, rather than just pressing down on it. This violent, highly symmetrical compression meant Britain could achieve critical mass using drastically less plutonium. To make the hammer blow work, the implosion had to be perfectly spherical. The weapon used a complex 32 lens array, combining RDX, a fast explosive, and baratol, a slow explosive, fired by detonators with microsecond precision. These lenses reshaped an outward blast into a perfectly focused, inward-moving shockwave. Let's look at how the British design stacked up against the American Fat Man bomb dropped 7 years earlier. While the US enjoyed an abundant industrial supply of plutonium, Britain faced extreme scarcity. Where the US used a basic solid core, the British weapon introduced the levitated pit for higher efficiency. Where the US relied on composition B, the British utilized high-purity RDX for greater stability and detonation velocity. Finally, instead of a direct contact initiator, Britain incorporated a refined modulated neutron initiator with precise gold foil separation and grooved geometry. Operation Hurricane proves that necessity truly is the mother of invention. Driven into isolation, British scientists created a far more sophisticated, efficient physics package than the original American blueprints. Building the bomb was only half the battle. They had to get it to the test site safely and secretly, halfway around the world. On June 5, 1952, the bomb casing was loaded onto the HMS Plym. It embarked on an 8-week journey, escorted by the flagship HMS Campania. To avoid geopolitical unrest in Egypt and the Suez Canal, the ships took the long way around, routing completely around the Cape of Good Hope. However, the highly radioactive plutonium core and the volatile polonium initiator couldn't spend weeks at sea. In September 1952, they were flown via a relay of RAF bases. The final leg to the remote Montebello Islands in Western Australia was completed via a short Sunderland flying boat. By October, everything was in place. On October 2, 1952, William Penney gave the final approval for the test. The HMS Plym was moored in just 12 meters of water, sitting a mere 350 meters off the coast of Tramui Island. On the morning of October 3rd, the final countdown commenced. At exactly 7 hours 59 minutes and 23 seconds AM, the automated safety link closed, the firing circuit executed with an accuracy of 1 millionth of a second. 1 second later, the core went supercritical. The temperature inside the hull of the HMS Plym instantly spiked to nearly 1 million degrees. Think about the engineering required to document this. Custom-built ultra-high-speed cameras, designed at Fort Halstead and operating at a staggering 100,000 frames per second, captured the exact hydrodynamic expansion of the fireball. They had to capture it in the first microsecond before the expanding energy could even breach the steel hull of the ship. Seconds later, a blistering 600-mile-per-hour wind of scorching heat raced across the water. The yield was confirmed at 25 kilotons. Because the bomb detonated inside a shallow water vessel, it didn't produce the classic clean white mushroom cloud. Instead, it produced a jet-black, mud-laden cauliflower cloud of vaporized steel, mud and water that rose 3,000 meters into the sky. The 1,450-ton frigate HMS Plym didn't just sink, it was entirely vaporized. All that remained of the warship was a sticky black film floating on the seawater and tiny twisted chunks of metal raining down from the sky minutes later. On the ocean floor where the ship had just been floating, the blast carved out a massive saucer-shaped crater 6 meters deep and 300 meters wide. The test was a technical triumph, but nature had a surprise in store. Prevailing weather forecasts had predicted that the wind would carry the nuclear fallout harmlessly out into the empty Indian Ocean. Instead, just after the detonation, the winds reversed. The highly radioactive cloud drifted over the Australian mainland, depositing low but measurable levels of radiation across the continent, tracking as far away as Brisbane. While helicopters scooped up contaminated seawater to measure radiation levels, scientific recovery teams clad in heavy protective suits rowed small boats directly into the irradiated lagoon. Their mission was perilous: retrieve the valuable diagnostic instruments and record the devastating thermal and blast data before the sea could wash it away. Why did Britain do this? The official Ministry of Supply film stated it clearly. To deter aggression, we may have a greater voice in this great decision if we have the strength to defend ourselves. It was about political leverage and survival. The success of Montebello immediately reshaped British defence architecture, concluding that maintaining massive conventional armies was financially and economically unsustainable. Winston Churchill's returning government pivoted entirely to an independent nuclear deterrent. The Hurricane physics package was rapidly weaponized into the Blue Danube freefall bomb, officially transforming Britain into a definitive self-reliant nuclear power. On October 3, 1952, Great Britain celebrated an absolute triumph. They had mastered atomic fission and secured their technological independence. But in the atomic age, the goalposts never stopped moving. Less than 4 weeks later, on November 1, 1952, the United States detonated Ivy Mike in the Pacific. It was the world's first hydrogen bomb. Yielding 10.4 megatons, it was over 400 times more powerful than the British weapon that had just vaporized a frigate. The technology Britain had bled its post-war economy to master was instantly rendered obsolete on the global stage. The triumph of Operation Hurricane was absolute, but it was fleeting. It didn't mark the end of the journey. Instead, it forced Britain immediately into the next frantic, desperate race for the thermonuclear bomb.